100-year history of power in New York City, 1925 to 2025. For 100 years, this city has never stopped moving. It survived depressions. It survived wars. It survived collapse and rebirth. But cities do not move on their own. They are shaped by people, and more than anyone else, by those who hold power. This is a 100-year history of New York City, told through the people who ruled it. New York before LaGuardia, 1925 to 2033. In 1925, New York City was already immense. It was crowded, wealthy, and powerful. But it was not governed in the interest of the public. Real power did not sit in City Hall. It lived in political machines, party bosses, and private deals. For ordinary people, government was distant and often hostile. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, New York was exposed. There was no safety net, no coordinated welfare system, no plan for mass unemployment. The city had grown rich without learning how to protect its people. Who was Fiorello La Guardia? Fiorello La Guardia was an unlikely leader. Born in 1882, the son of Italian and Jewish immigrants, he spoke multiple languages and stood barely 5 feet tall. He despised corruption. He hated Tammany Hall, and he believed government should intervene, not observe. In 1933, as New York collapsed under economic despair, LaGuardia ran for mayor on a radical idea. The city must be saved by the state. 1934, LaGuardia takes office. LaGuardia became mayor in 1934, in the darkest moment in the city's modern history. Unemployment exceeded 20%. Thousands were homeless. Municipal finances were collapsing. His first decisive move was political, not local. He aligned New York directly with President Franklin D. Roosevelt and the Federal New Deal. For the first time, New York became a laboratory of federal urban governance. Policies that reshaped the city, 1934 to 1945. Under LaGuardia, New York experienced unprecedented state intervention. Between 1934 and 1945, the city built massive public housing projects, expanded public health and sanitation, reorganized police and city services, absorbed billions in federal funding. These policies worked. The city survived the Depression. Infrastructure expanded. Public order returned. New York became governable. The hidden cost of salvation. But LaGuardia's success came with a cost. Power centralized. Decision-making moved upward. Neighborhood autonomy weakened. By saving New York, LaGuardia transformed it into a city that depended on planners, budgets, and authority. This model would soon be inherited by someone far more dangerous. 1945, a city permanently changed. When LaGuardia left office in 1945, New York was no longer a chaotic industrial city. It was a city of policy, a city of planning, a city of state power. He did not create perfection, he created control. And control was about to be used aggressively. Fiorello La Guardia saved New York, but every salvation reshapes what survives. The city lived, but it would never again belong entirely to its people. Robert Moses, 1945-1965. After 1945, New York no longer needed saving. It needed direction. And direction came from a man who was never elected. 1945, a city ready to be rebuilt. In 1945, New York emerged from World War II victorious and vulnerable. Factories had boomed, the population had grown, federal money was flowing. What the city needed next was direction, and into that moment stepped a man who did not believe in democracy, at least not the slow kind. Who was Robert Moses? Robert Moses never won an election. He never needed to. By 1945, Moses controlled the city's park system, major bridges and tunnels, housing authorities, highway construction budgets. He held more power than the mayor without ever facing voters. The philosophy: build first, ask later. Moses believed cities were machines, neighborhoods were obstacles, people were variables. His creed was simple: build infrastructure at scale, and society will adapt. Public debate slowed progress. Courts interfered with vision. Community consent was optional. Highways over homes, 1948-1963. Between 1948 and 1963, Moses reshaped New York with concrete. He built the Cross-Bronx Expressway, the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, dozens of parkways and arterial roads. To make room, entire neighborhoods were demolished. Over 60,000 residents, mostly working class and minority families, were displaced. The Cross-Bronx Expressway, a case study. The Cross-Bronx Expressway, completed in 1963, cut straight through stable neighborhoods. Property values collapsed. Local businesses vanished. Crime followed. The South Bronx entered a downward spiral that would last decades. Infrastructure had succeeded. Community had failed. Public housing and urban renewal. Moses championed public housing, but on his terms. Large towers replaced dense neighborhoods. Social networks were erased. Poverty was concentrated, not solved. Urban renewal earned a darker nickname: Negro removal. The benefits: what Moses got right. Moses was not a villain in every sense. He delivered: parks and beaches used by millions, modern bridges and tunnels, a city capable of mass automobile travel. New York functioned at a scale few cities could match. The cost: democracy erodes. But efficiency came at a democratic price. Decisions moved away from neighborhoods. Power consolidated in authorities and boards. Public voice weakened. New York became a city planned for people, not by them. Resistance and the limits of power, 1960 to 1965. By the early 1960s, resistance emerged. Community activists, urban thinkers like Jane Jacobs, neighborhood coalitions. Projects were challenged, some were stopped. Moses was no longer untouchable. 1965, the end of an era. By 1965, Moses's influence declined. He left behind a city forever changed. New York was faster, bigger, more connected, and more divided. Robert Moses proved that cities can be built without consent. But what is built without consent rarely belongs to everyone. The next leaders would inherit a powerful city and a fractured one.
John Lindsay and the Collapse of Confidence, 1965 to 1977. By 1965, New York was powerful and fragile. The age of building was over. The age of conflict had begun. 1965 to 1977. Mayors, protests, and the collapse of confidence. 1965, a city after Robert Moses. By 1965, Robert Moses was no longer in command, but the city he left behind was unmistakably his. Highways cut through neighborhoods. Public housing stood tall and isolated. Decision-making had moved far from local streets. New York was powerful, but it was brittle. The next era would not be defined by construction, but by conflict. John Lindsay, a mayor of reform, 1966. In 1966, John Lindsay took office. Tall, wealthy, and reform-minded, Lindsay represented a break from machine politics. He believed New York could be governed through dialogue, inclusion, and moral leadership. He inherited a city already under strain and promised reconciliation. 1967 to 1968. Race, protest, and policing. The late 1960s brought national upheaval to local streets. Civil rights protests intensified. Police-community relations deteriorated. Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant erupted in unrest. Lindsay walked into neighborhoods during riots, an unprecedented gesture. Symbolism mattered, but structural problems remained untouched. Deindustrialization and job loss. As protests filled streets, factories quietly closed. From 1965 to 1975, New York lost hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs. Ports declined. Garment and printing industries shrank. Middle-class stability eroded. The city was becoming poorer, even as demands on government increased. The fiscal trap, 1969 to 1974. To maintain services, the city borrowed. Short-term notes replaced long-term planning. Debt masked decline. By the early 1970s, New York relied on rolling over loans, hoping growth would return. It did not. 1975, the fiscal crisis. In 1975, the city faced insolvency. Banks refused to lend. Payroll was at risk. Basic services faced shutdown. The famous headline followed: Ford to city, drop dead. New York was humiliated and forced into external control. Austerity and social pain, 1975 to 1977. The bailout came with conditions. Budgets were cut. Public employment shrank. Transit, education, and health suffered. Crime rose. Confidence collapsed. The social contract, already fragile, fractured further. What Lindsay got right and wrong. Lindsay was right about inclusion. He was right about listening, but he underestimated structural forces. Capital flight, deindustrialization, debt dependency. Good intentions could not substitute for fiscal reality. 1977, a city in ashes and transition. By 1977, New York symbolized urban failure. Blackouts plunged neighborhoods into chaos. Arson scarred the Bronx. The subway decayed. But the crisis also cleared the stage. A different kind of leadership was coming, one that would trade compassion for discipline. Between 1965 and 1977, New York lost confidence in itself. The city learned that ideals alone cannot govern decline, and decline, once begun, feeds on hesitation. What followed would be a recovery, but on new terms.
Ed Koch and the City Saved by Finance, 1978 to 1993. In 1978, New York was no longer dying, but it was not living either. What it needed now was discipline. 1978, a city on life support. By 1978, New York City was no longer collapsing, but it was barely alive. The fiscal crisis had ended formal bankruptcy, but the damage remained. Crime was high. Infrastructure was crumbling. Middle-class families were leaving. New York did not need inspiration. It needed control. Ed Koch enters City Hall.
In 1978, Ed Koch became mayor. Brash, blunt, unapologetically pragmatic. Koch was not a visionary, he was a manager. And at that moment in history, management mattered more than dreams. The Koch Doctrine, stability first. Koch's central belief was simple. Before justice, before equality, before reform, the city must function. His administration focused on fiscal discipline, restoring creditworthiness, reassuring investors. New York's survival would come through finance, not compassion. Wall Street as partner, 1979 to 1985. During the early 1980s, Wall Street rebounded. Financial deregulation at the federal level combined with local tax incentives. Banks returned, investment firms expanded, office towers filled. New York stabilized, but it became increasingly dependent on finance. The unequal recovery. Not everyone benefited. While Manhattan revived, many outer borough neighborhoods did not. Public housing deteriorated. Social services remained underfunded. The city was recovering, but unevenly. Koch accepted this trade-off. Crime, policing, and public fear. Throughout the 1980s, crime remained central to urban life. The subway was dangerous. Times Square symbolized decay. Koch expanded policing, but lacked a coherent crime philosophy. Fear became normalized. New York functioned, but it did not feel safe. The moral limits of pragmatism. By the late 1980s, criticism mounted. The city worked, but for whom? Inequality widened. Racial tensions deepened. Trust in government eroded. Efficiency alone could not heal division. 1989, a change in tone. David Dinkins. In 1989, David Dinkins was elected mayor. He promised healing, inclusion, a gorgeous mosaic city. Dinkins sought to soften the city after years of austerity, but timing would betray him. Crime peaks, trust breaks, 1990 to 1993. During 1990 to 1991, crime reached historic highs. Over 2,200 homicides in a single year. Though crime trends were long-term, Dinkins was blamed. Public patience collapsed. New York turned once again toward order over empathy. 1993, the end of the bridge era. By 1993, the bridge between crisis and recovery closed. Koch had stabilized the city. Dinkins had tried to humanize it. Neither resolved the core tension, prosperity versus belonging. The next leader would choose decisively. Between 1978 and 1993, New York learned how to survive. It balanced its books. It reassured capital. It restored function. But survival is not the same as justice. The city was ready for a harder hand. Giuliani to Bloomberg. 1994 to 2013. By 1994, New York no longer wanted explanations. It wanted order. 1994, a city demanding order. By 1994, New York was exhausted. Crime had dominated daily life for over a decade. Trust in institutions was thin. Many residents no longer believed the city could be gentle. What they wanted was simple: order. Rudy Giuliani: law, control, visibility. In 1994, Rudy Giuliani became mayor. A former federal prosecutor, Giuliani believed disorder invited collapse. His philosophy was direct: enforce the law aggressively. Eliminate visible disorder. Restore fear of authority. This approach would define his legacy. Broken windows policing, 1994 to 2001. Giuliani embraced broken windows policing. Minor offenses were targeted: fare evasion, public drinking, street disorder. The message was clear: rules matter, everywhere. Crime fell dramatically throughout the late 1990s. New York felt safer. The cost of order. But the cost was uneven. Aggressive policing disproportionately affected Black communities, Latino neighborhoods, the poor. Civil liberties eroded. Police-community relations hardened. Order returned, but trust did not. September 11, 2001. Giuliani's defining moment. On September 11, 2001, New York was attacked. In crisis, Giuliani became a symbol of calm authority. His public leadership unified the city. His visibility mattered. But 9/11 also marked an ending. The era of Giuliani's New York closed that day. Michael Bloomberg, The City as a System, 2002. In 2002, Michael Bloomberg took office. A billionaire technocrat, Bloomberg saw the city not as a moral project, but as a system. His belief: what can be measured can be managed. Data-driven governance and efficiency, 2002 to 2013. Bloomberg expanded data-driven policing, public health regulation, zoning reforms, smoking bans, sugary drink limits, luxury development rezoning. The city became healthier, wealthier, more efficient, and less affordable. Global capital and urban transformation. Under Bloomberg, New York fully embraced globalization. Foreign capital flooded real estate. Luxury towers reshaped the skyline. Housing became an investment vehicle. The city gained prestige and lost accessibility. What Bloomberg got right and wrong. Bloomberg professionalized city governance. He reduced inefficiency, improved public health, stabilized finances, but he governed from above. Community voice weakened. Inequality deepened. The city worked, but fewer people could afford to live in it. 2013, a city at its peak and its edge. By 2013, New York was admired globally. Safe, wealthy, efficient. But beneath the success lay tension. Prosperity had limits. Belonging had conditions. Between 1994 and 2013, New York mastered control. It learned how to enforce order, how to manage systems, how to attract global capital. What it had not learned was how to include everyone. That question would define the next era.
De Blasio to Adams, 2014 to 2025. In 2014, New York reached a breaking point, not of collapse, but of inequality. 2014, a rebellion against the global city. By 2014, New York was thriving, but many New Yorkers were not. Rents had doubled in a decade. Middle-class families were leaving. Inequality dominated public conversation. The city that had mastered global prestige was losing its sense of fairness. That year, voters chose a rupture. Bill de Blasio, the promise of a tale of two cities. In 2014, Bill de Blasio became mayor. He framed New York as a tale of two cities. His agenda focused on universal pre-K, rent stabilization, higher minimum wages. For the first time in years, inequality, not efficiency, led city policy. Gains without structural change, 2014 to 2019. De Blasio delivered real benefits. Pre-K enrollment expanded dramatically. Worker protections improved. Tenant rights strengthened. But the deeper structure did not shift. Housing supply remained constrained. Global capital continued to dominate real estate. The city grew kinder, but not cheaper. March 2020, when the city went silent. In March 2020, New York became the epicenter of COVID-19 in the United States. Hospitals overflowed. Sirens replaced traffic. Office towers emptied. Over 40,000 New Yorkers would die. Density, once the city's strength, became its greatest vulnerability. Emergency power and the return of the state, 2020 to 2021. During the pandemic, government returned forcefully. Under Governor Andrew Cuomo, lockdowns, mandates, and emergency powers reshaped daily life. Federal stimulus kept the city alive. Markets paused. The state stepped in. Once again, New York survived not by capital, but by public authority.
The end of de Blasio's era, 2021. By 2021, de Blasio's coalition had frayed. Crime perception rose. Quality of life complaints intensified. Pandemic fatigue set in. Compassion no longer felt sufficient. Voters demanded reassurance. Eric Adams,
Order returns to the center. 2022. In 2022, Eric Adams became mayor. A former police officer, Adams prioritized public safety, visible policing, fiscal caution. The city pivoted again, from inequality back to order. Remote work and the crisis of purpose. Post-pandemic, something fundamental changed. Work no longer required proximity. Office districts struggled. Transit ridership lagged. Commercial real estate faltered. New York faced a question it had never confronted before. What is a city for when people no longer need to gather? 2023-2025, a city searching for balance. By 2025, New York remains powerful but uncertain. It is still a financial hub, a cultural capital, a symbol of ambition. But it is also less affordable, more polarized, less inevitable. The city stands between two futures, control or inclusion. For 100 years, New York was shaped by its rulers. Some built, some controlled, some tried to heal. Each left a mark. The city survived every crisis, but survival alone is no longer the question. The question now is simple. Who is New York for?